Hey guys, it's Suzanne Light back today with another teaching lesson. I have some exciting news to tell y'all. I told you that I've been kind of keeping up with the numbers on this, and so I've been seeing growth even from lesson 1 all the way through. We've already done 22 lessons on the book of John. And FYI, I am very much into study in the book of Revelation, which is going to come next. So we got to finish up John so we can get into Revelation. So I thought last night, well, I'll just add up all the numbers of how many total views have been on lesson 1 through lesson 22. And I squealed, and John said, what's going on? I said, John, there's been 8,410 views on the book of John. And he said, Suzanne, that is amazing. And see, the enemy tries to bring us down when we talk about, when we lose subscribers, and 8,410 views on the book of John. So I'm so excited. So keep watching, keep sharing, tell your friends about it. It's just good basic things that we can apply to our life. And today we're going to go over the greatest miracle, what a lot of people consider the greatest miracle besides his life that he gave for us on the cross. Is the greatest miracle ever done, and that is raising Lazarus back from the dead, which no other prophet, man of God, king, whatever, has ever even claimed to do, because they can't do it. They can't do it. So let's get right into the 11th chapter of John. I just had to share that exciting news with you. I was so tickled. But let's get into this tremendous lesson about, well, first of all, we're starting out with the death of Lazarus. It's kind of a long chapter. I believe there's totally 57 verses, so it'll probably be in 2 lessons. So let's get right into John, the 11th chapter. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and his sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you. Are you going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. So as I said, perhaps the most remarkable miracle that Jesus ever performed. Jesus had a very close relationship with this family. They didn't ask Jesus actually to come. They presented his illness to Jesus. So when he heard that he was sick, he still stayed 2 more days, at least 25 miles off from where they were. So beyond all doubt, this was just to allow things to come to the very worst in order for him to display his glory. Jesus is never caught off guard, okay? He's not caught off guard ever. And that gives me great comfort to know that even when I'm caught off guard, he's not. But how, in the meantime, how trying this was to the faith of his friends, and how unlike the way in which love to a dying friend usually shows itself. He knew that he was in very bad shape. He also knew what was going to happen, but they didn't. So this really tested their faith. But the ways of divine are not the ways of human love. Often they are reversed. Let me read that again. But the ways of divine are not as the ways of human love. Often they are the reverse. And Jesus actually knew that the events recorded in this situation, the very events that he knew was going to happen, would set the religious leaders actually in motion and in determination to kill him. So he knew all of this. Through it all, the end result was that he said that he, as the Son of God, may be glorified in his death and resurrection. As I said, he truly loved this family. He was very close to them. And this was a testing of their faith. And don't you know, they knew what all Jesus had done for everybody. Don't you know, during this time, they were wondering what in the world was going on. Where was Jesus? Or why hadn't Jesus just done something? They knew that Jesus didn't actually have to come to him. They knew that Jesus could have done something right then and there. And so it did seem strange that he didn't act immediately, knowing how close he was to this family. And I know it was agonizing to Mary and Martha. Jesus literally, and they knew this, could have healed Lazarus from the place that he was. And he was they said Judea was about 25 miles away. And so they knew that all he had to do was to speak the word and it would have happened. And remember, Judea was a very dangerous place for him. They were hot on his trail. So he could have done something where he was. Lazarus could have been healed, but instead he waited and went back to Judea. And when he had just left, they had been trying to stone him. So it was a very dangerous place for him to be. But he knew that he had a specific time to work and do what he needed to do. And if you'll notice, he first told the disciples that Lazarus was asleep. He used the term sleep because he knew truly he would be waking him up. He would be waking him up. He was glad he had not been there because he was certain of the outcome. He knew what the outcome was going to be. I'm not saying this wasn't hard news for Jesus to hear, because I believe it was, and we go on and talk about that. So through it all, we know from the story that grief was comforted, that life was restored, and actually through this miracle, this last great miracle that Jesus would do, that it absolutely set into motion Jesus' death. That's what this did. Let's go on and read at verse 17 where it says, I am the resurrection and the life. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give it to you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ and the Son of God who is coming into the world. Now, Jesus waited 4 days. And he waited 4 days for a very specific reason. I did not know this. I was sharing this with John, and he said, yeah, I had heard this before. But the reason that Jesus waited 4 days is because it was Jewish superstition that that a soul lingered around a body for 3 days, hoping to regain life again. So that was a Jewish superstition. And it was accepted that after 4 days, there was absolutely no hope of resurrection. And I did not know that. And, but John said he had heard it before, or he had read it before. So that's the reason that Jesus specifically waited 4 days, so that there would be no hope of him being resurrected. But God. Martha honestly expressed her disappointment in Jesus' late arrival. It's possible that Martha didn't even consider that Jesus was able to raise Lazarus from the dead. She was not, when he talked about he'll be risen, she said, Lord, I know he'll rise again on the resurrection. She wanted him there. This was her precious brother. But death was no stronger in his presence than disease. She knew he would rise again in resurrection, but Jesus boldly challenged Martha to trust that he was the source of eternal life. He asked her, he said, do you believe? Let's see, what was that specific question? Do you believe? He said, everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? He challenged her, and she said, yes, Lord, I believe that you're the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. So Jesus presented himself as the champion over death to Martha. The believer will never die, but simply make an instant transition from an old life to a new life. Martha answered correctly. So he's saying, Martha, he knew that he was going to raise him from the dead, but he knew that even if Lazarus was going forth, he still would not die. This earth is so temporary. We make this earth everything because this is all we know. But he said, even if he dies, it says here that they will an instant transition from an old life to a new life. So, pretty powerful, blowing Martha's mind at the things that he's saying. Let's go on where it says in verse 28, Jesus weeps. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. He cared for them, and that's the reason he was so troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And Jesus wept. The shortest scripture in the Bible, Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how you loved him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? So Martha tells Mary that Jesus wanted some private time with her, and she wasted no time in getting up and going to him. And he said to her the same thing that he told Martha. But the grief and the tears of Mary and Martha moved Jesus deeply. He loved these people. And we know that when someone we love hurts, we hurt with them. God truly sees the tears of the grief-stricken, and he is moved with compassion. That goes to show you that how true that is, because Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit are one. And if Jesus was so moved by their tears and their grief, he was so moved that he wept himself. That's the way God is with us. And in weeping was loud wailing. That's what they did. Others would come and grieve for the people when they lost a loved one, but Jesus wept. It described Jesus' expression of grief. Jesus was greatly moved, but he was not out of control. When it says that Jesus wept, I believe it was more of a silent. It was not weeping and wailing, because Jesus is never out of control. And Jesus knew who was in control, where the rest of them did not. So Jesus was probably more angry and troubled at the destruction of the great enemy of humanity, death, knowing, sympathizing with them and what they were going through while he wasn't there. But he also knew that he could break the dominating power of death. And oh, he's fixing to. Let's get on. I don't want to stop here because this is so good. Let's finish up because this is so good, starting with verse 38. Then Jesus, deeply moved again. This was a very emotional time for Jesus. Came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone laid against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Woo! Go, Jesus. Amazing. Would you not have liked to have been there? Some of us would have took off running, but they were in total amazement. Nothing like this had ever happened before. So when he said, "Take away the stone," very strange request, because they didn't do that. And so the Jewish people standing around probably thought, he wasn't here when he died. He just wants one last look to make sure that he's dead. But Jesus was capable of this without anybody else's faith. He asked Mary and Martha, did they believe? Of course, they did not quite understand, but they believed in him. And how many times have we been there where we don't understand everything, but we believe in him? It is that blind faith that we can have to know that I know, that I know, that I know, that I know. And so many times we have to stand up on that during times of great distress. I have stood up on it way too many times in the tragedies that I've experienced. I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know where. I just know that you're God and that you're going to get me through this. But in order for them to experience the glory that God was going to do, that stone needed to be moved away. They needed to have faith. So they acted in faith and they removed the stone. Jesus was very confident in his relationship with God the Father. The public prayer was not necessarily for Jesus and God, but it was for those standing around. And actually, we read in the Bible that Lazarus was resurrected. He really wasn't. He was resuscitated. I love it. He was resuscitated. Life came back into his body. Now, I love this part. And I've heard so many preachers preach it before. I didn't see it anywhere in the commentaries, but this is so neat. It is so awesome to think about. Jesus had to be so specific when he called Lazarus forth out of that grave. He had to call him by name. You want to know why? Because if he had just said, "Come forth," I can just imagine that his voice has been, every dead body around would have come forth. He said, "Lazarus, come forth." And Lazarus comes back to life. He didn't need them to move the stone away. He could have moved it. He just wanted them to concentrate on the miracle that Lazarus had come forth. Okay, I'm going to stop right here to keep this. I'm trying to keep them a good length of time so that you have time to sit down and watch them. I'm going to come right back and I'm going to pick right up what happens immediately after Lazarus is raised from the dead. So stay tuned. The next lesson will be coming right back up.